Uglarovic Zverlija Kisa Šopsrat Zverlija Zvel kućaze, zvel simrera Zvirine Zvel siglaru zagarsene Atzgazine, agatzgazene Šelji mani zverga bifsene Zvel siglaru zagarsene Atzgazine, agatzgazene Šelji mani zverga bifsene La 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 la
Welcome to Reimagining Soviet Georgia. My name is Brian.
And I'm Sopo.
And today we are very happy to welcome a special guest from Canada by way of Ukraine, Ivan Katchanovski. Ivan, thank you so much for coming today. Introduce yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Yes, thank you for the invitation. It is a pleasure to join your podcast, which I follow your research and your popular social media reports about post-Soviet countries in Georgia and other countries, which is also very important. So I research professionally as academic, as a scholar, Ukraine, politics and conflicts in Ukraine, since I did my PhD dissertation on this topic at George Mason University in the United States. And I specialize in conflicts and political violence in Ukraine, also far right in Ukraine, but I also research Canada and the US, including labor unions in Canada and the US, politics of intellectuals, political communication. So this is my main area of research, and I published already 6 books. I have another book about Ukraine, which will be published this year. I have now published 22 peer-reviewed journal articles and 14 book chapters. And I'm originally from Ukraine. I'm from Western Ukraine, from city of Lutsk, which is close to Poland. And I studied in Kyiv. And I also studied in the United States. I got my PhD in the US. And also studied in Central European University in Prague at the time. So I'm also active on social media, because this is very important to kind of to make sure that people know actually about events taking place, about actually what's going on, because media is not a reliable source. And I can say this professionally. I studied media coverage of conflicts in Ukraine, of politics of Ukraine, but also other countries, including Georgia. And specifically, I did a study of politics of Georgia-Russia war coverage by United States media, and together with professor from New Zealand. And when I was a visiting scholar at Harvard University, so I also was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto and at the Kluge Center for Scholars at the Library of Congress, and also professor visiting assistant professor at State University of New York at Potsdam, and now I teach at the University of Ottawa in Canada.
You know, your comment about the media not being trustworthy and being kind of a very foggy place, a difficult place to follow real events, is a good segue, because in your recent book, The Russia-Ukraine War and Its Origins, From the Maidan to the Ukraine War, which I got a chance to read, it's very, very good. And you really emphasize the problems with media coverage and popular narratives about the origins of the Russia-Ukraine war. So maybe a way we could start for our listeners is that in this book, you address some very common popular misconceptions about the origins of the Russia-Ukraine war. So what do you think are the most important misconceptions that you try and set the record straight on about the origins and development of the Russia-Ukraine war?
So I look into, in my book, which is open access, which is freely available for anybody to read, and download and republish and translate in any language, because this is published as open access. So I can analyze different kind of narratives by media and governments in Russia, in the Western countries, and in Ukraine about this war. So Russia presented in Russian media, Russian government presented this war as a legal invasion, basically preventive war to stop in defense of Donbas, separatist Donbas republics, which were recognized by Russia, because Russia claimed that Ukraine was imminent, there was an imminent attack on these separatist republics. And they did not also call this war as a war, they call this special military operation. But, so this is like Russian narrative about this war. And they also claim that there is a genocide of Russians or Russian speakers in Ukraine. Contrary to this view, in the Western media and Ukrainian media and the governments and politicians, they presented this war as unprovoked. There was no provocation, there was no reason for this invasion by Russia. They also stated that this war was illegal. They also stated that this war included a genocide of Ukrainians. This was aim of Russia. They said that this is the goal of Russia was to occupy entire Ukraine, including Kiev, in 3 days. So this is kind of narrative which was propagated by different governments and by different media, and often also repeated by Wikipedia, which is another popular source for information about this conflict. So I can say, based on my research, so all these narratives are, again, not based on reality. So, because according to research which I conducted, to a variety of evidence which I conducted using primary evidence, primary sources in different languages, including my native Ukrainian language, Russian language, and many English language, and I also speak Polish language. So I can say that there was no evidence of any imminent attack by the Ukrainian forces on separatist, self-proclaimed separatist republics in Donbas, which was a reason actually for the Russia to launch a war with Georgia in 2008, when the Georgian government forces launched basically attack trying to take back control of the separatist republic of South Ossetia. And this was kind of misrepresented by the West as just attack by Russia, actually. So if you're looking to, so in this case, in case of Ukraine, there was no such evidence. Even so, Zelensky publicly claimed and stated that the goal of Ukrainian government was to take back control over Donbas and Crimea, and specifically he referred to military means similar to what was done by Croatia, for instance, in taking back control over Crimea and other self-proclaimed republics which were populated by ethnic Serbs in Croatia. So in this case, again, this and according to international law, according to United Nations, this war is illegal based on international law. But it was not unprovoked, because this war represented continuation or escalation, dramatic escalation by Russia of conflicts which were taking place in Ukraine, and also conflicts within, not only within Ukraine, including a conflict in Donbas or civil war in Donbas, but also conflict between Russia and Ukraine, specifically Russian annexation of Crimea and Russian military interventions in Donbas in support of separatists. But also this was escalation of conflicts between Russia and the West, which started after Western-backed violent overthrow of Ukrainian government in 2014. And so in my book, I show actually that this violent overthrow of Ukrainian government in 2014 by means of false flag Maidan massacre was a key element or key starting point of these conflicts between Russia and the West, because before this conflicts were not violent, they could have been de-escalated, but afterwards this became a spiral of conflict escalation when there was Maidan massacre, overthrow of Yanukovych government, and then Russia escalated and responded by annexing Crimea, which was pro-Russian region in Ukraine, and started to support separatists in Donbas, which were also pro-Russian region and had the history of separatist attitudes. And there was civil war in Donbas, which was denied by the West also. So Western media, basically, and especially Ukrainian media and governments, they denied that there was civil war in Donbas. But this is clear based on evidence which I presented in my book, and also evidence which also presented by most of scholars who research this conflict, that this was a civil war, but also with Russian military interventions in 2014 and 2015. But there was no, again, war between Russia and Ukraine, which was also common kind of claim narrative that there was a war between Russia and Ukraine since 2014. So this was not the case. And there was also no evidence of a genocide of Ukrainians or Russians in Ukraine. So the claims by Russia, by Russian government and media, by Western governments and media, and also politicians, and by Ukrainian governments and media and politicians, that there was a genocide of either ethnic Russians or Russian speakers or Ukrainians. There was no such evidence. Even so, there was clear evidence of war crimes taking place during this war. And also, in case of claim by Russia that Ukraine is Nazi state, again, this claim was used by Russia to justify its invasion claim, that Ukraine is Nazi state or neo-Nazi state. But Western countries and Ukrainian government denies that there were any Nazis or neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They claim that far-right organizations like Azov became integrated in Ukrainian forces, so there was no, again, presence of Nazis or neo-Nazis. But actually, both these narratives also false because, because there is no evidence that Ukraine is Nazi state or neo-Nazi state or fascist state and so on. But there is clear evidence that there is a very strong and and very influential faction of far right, including open neo-Nazis like Azov movement, which is now became much stronger since the Russian invasion, and they are very powerful since the Maidan massacre in which they were involved. They were also involved in the Odessa massacre of pro-Russian separatists in Odessa in southern Ukraine, and they became very powerful also during the civil war in Donbas by creating their own paramilitary formations and military formations and police formations under formal, which became later under formal control of Ukrainian government, but they became actually under de facto control of the far right, including neo-Nazi organizations, which became now known as Azov movement. So all these narratives again are false, and according to my estimates, again, the war is claims that by Russia that there was no war in Ukraine. This is special military operation. Actually, is not also supported because it's clear that this is a war between again Russia and Ukraine. But another important aspect of this conflict, which was denied by the media, by politicians, by governments in Ukraine and the West, that there was no. In Western involvement, basically, this was just war between Russia and Ukraine going back to 2014. But actually, this war started in 2022 with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this war was not only a war between Russia and Ukraine, which was again denied by Russia, but it is clear war, not special military operation. And there was also a proxy war taking place between Russia and the West, which is very important to understand since Ukraine could not have been able to defend against superior Russian forces without such support, without provision of military equipment, weapons, and economic and financial support, and humanitarian support and political support for such a long time. And this is a clear case of proxy war taking place in Ukraine. But in addition to this still ongoing element of civil war taking place in Ukraine, which is again almost never reported by the Western media, politicians, and also Ukrainian media and politicians. Even so, even recently there was recognized by or was stated by Ukrainian officials that every six prisoners of war taken during this war by Ukrainian forces in captivity in Ukraine is actually Ukrainian citizen, which is just illustration that people from Donbas and Crimea specifically, they are fighting for Russia now. since Russian annexation of these regions. And I also examine other aspects of these narratives and other issues like, for instance, origins of this war, role of NATO expansion, enlargement, which was very important again, but also was inflated by Russia because there was no immediate prospect of NATO membership of Ukraine. But Ukraine was also not independent, so this was not only NATO membership because de facto Ukraine became a NATO kind of client state, United States client state, in which Ukraine became dependent on, so basically Ukraine lost its independence and became dependent on NATO countries, specifically United States, after the Maidan massacre and violent overthrow of the Ukrainian government, which was de facto supported by the West in 2014. And this continues now. So this is also very important to understand, kind of that each country, basically each media of each country and politicians in each country just present their own narrative, which is often taken for granted and taken at face value, but even by many supposed academics, who are supposed to look for evidence and not just repeat these narratives. But they often repeat these narratives, take this for granted, and especially if you know that this is what's going on, you're able to look into primary sources. This is often not reported at all. Like in the case, for instance, of Maidan massacre, there is overwhelming evidence, which I publish in my books, in my peer-reviewed journal articles, and even Ukrainian verdict, which shows that this massacre was false flag massacre. But again, there's nothing reported by the media. There's just few notable exceptions.
So people have Maidan was this great uprising where Ukrainians reclaimed their own homeland, is a lot of times the way it's presented. So just tell us, like, walk us through Maidan.
Yeah, so Maidan started with basically with decision by Yanukovych, who was president of Ukraine at the time, and who was relatively pro-Russian president, to abandon or to suspend signing of a membership, not a membership, but free trade and association agreement with the European Union in 2013, in November 2013. And this led to protests taking place in downtown Kyiv, which was relatively small protests taking place, just thousands of people, maybe 10,000 maximum. And this protest was declining. Typically for Ukraine, it was, again, taking place with involvement of students, basically pro-Western elements, and they supported European Union integration of Ukraine. But by November 30th in the morning, there was just a few hundred protesters remaining on the Maidan, which is Independence Square, which is name of Independence Square in Ukraine, which is called Maidan. And I think this is Persian or Turkic word, but which means square in Ukrainian, or main square in Ukrainian. So this kind of protest was about to end, but suddenly there was police. In the morning, I was watching this live. In the morning, around 4 a.m., you have police units came to the square and started again, and there was clashes between police units and protesters taking place on the square, which were televised as a kind of, and this was shown by live television and then broadcast by all Ukrainian media and a lot of social media, that this was basically violence by the police who tried to disperse these protesters who supported basically Ukraine becoming a part of the European Union. So this was presented, and they said this were young people, students, children, who were violently beaten and assaulted by the police for no reason. They were peaceful protesters, and this is what was the start of Maidan, and specifically violence of Maidan. But when I look into evidence, which was not reported by the media, and this publicly available evidence, that this was not just as simple as was mentioned, because there is evidence of clear knowledge of opposition forces, opposition leaders. They knew in advance that this would be such a dispersal of Maidan activists on this in this square. They took away, for instance, all equipment from Maidan stage in advance of this. they made a statement on Ukrainian television, live television, that there would be such dispersal by the police even before this happened. They also knew, and one of Maidan leaders admitted this, that they knew in advance about such dispersal, but they never informed people on this square about such dispersal. They basically tried to use them specifically for such purposes, try to kind of create this violence as a starting point for Maidan protests. And this is what happened, because also you have a television camera, like so you have basically a small group of protesters, about a few hundred remaining on a square, which was peaceful, nothing was taking place, but you have a television camera from and television crew standing there like until 4 a.m. until this event took place, violent dispersal took place. They were standing and then started to broadcast this dispersal, which was quite unusual because you have most popular television channel at the time doing this, and there was no reason to do this basically unless you know that something would take place. And this also was not accidental, because this television channel was owned by oligarchs, whose at the time was supporter of Yanukovych, and another associate of this oligarch was head of presidential administration of Yanukovych. But they de facto they supported Yanukovych before, like formally, but informally they supported Maidan opposition. And so this evidence, clear evidence, which was stated by, I am cited in my book and in my studies, that this decision to disperse Maidan activists was issued not by Yanukovych or his Minister of Internal Affairs, but this decision was, or this order to disperse Maidan protesters was issued by this head of presidential administration, who was de facto kind of working for Maidan opposition or against Yanukovych, because there were business disputes, because basically Yanukovych and his sons and his family, his personal network, tried to take over control over enterprises and assets of oligarchs, including these oligarchs who supported him before. So this is kind of very important to understand, that this was basically staged kind of violence. But another aspect which was almost never reported by the media, and that there was not only kind of dispersal by the police, violence by the police, there was a presence of far-right sector on the Maidan right before the massacre, and I'm sorry, not this massacre, but this violent dispersal on November 30th. But there was also their presence during this violent clashes, and they were fighting with the police basically during this dispersal. There are videos of this fight, but again, they were never reported by the media at the time. Even so, you have videos of they fighting with police, throwing again fire at them and using violence, and then they disappeared. This was kind of also involvement of far right, and they were never reported. And most of people who were injured, beaten by the police, actually were not students, they were old people. Most of them came from Western Ukraine, which is an anti-Russian region in Ukraine. So they were not native of Kiev, they were not students, but this media misrepresented this specifically to inflame kind of protest mood in Ukraine against Yanukovych, and use this, which was successfully done afterwards. And there was also never reported that several dozen of police officers were also injured during this dispersal, which is again would not be the case if this was just one-sided violence by the police. But again, never reported by the media. And then, because of all this media coverage, next day you have hundreds of over 100,000 protesters taking place in Kiev against Yanukovych government, against this violent dispersal by the police, because they saw just what the media shows them. And this was the start of mass protest, which was called Euromaidan, because it was named after basically in support of European integration, if you can. And opposition at the time presented this agreement of free trade and association agreement between Ukraine and the European Union as a membership of Ukraine, which was not the case. There was no specifically no mentioning of any membership prospect in such agreements. But this was presented by the media basically that Ukraine was denied a membership in the European Union, which would lead to all this kind of like paradise life with people, with Ukrainians basically being able to relax, like living Germans on French, as kind of and Austrians and so on, in a very kind of lavish life and so on, without doing anything, just becoming members of European Union. So this is kind of led to such protests, which led to Maidan.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, the news station was a rival oligarch, was owned by the rival oligarch, right?
No, this was oligarch who was, how to say, formerly he was, or previously he was pre-Yanukovych oligarch. There were like two
Right, but
oligarchs.
then right, but then they switched sides, right? He switched sides.
Yeah, he like behind like how to say, not publicly he supported Maidan. They supported Maidan opposition. They financed this Klitschko party, which became one of Maidan leaders. So they give money, they give support to Maidan. But formally they were working for Yanukovych and supporting him.
So the media said that there was going to be a dispersal. I just kind of missed that a little bit.
No,
They're
this is
going
one of opposition leaders doing a very popular television show, which was called Schuster Live. Like around midnight on just a few hours before this dispersal, there was a politician from Maidan opposition, from opposition parties, who said they're like on live television that police basically right now is beating protesters on activists on Maidan Square. But there was nothing at that time yet. This took place several hours afterwards, like around 4 a.m. But they already said that this was taking place. So they knew that this would take place, and they said this specific kind of even so there was no such
so
riot.
they announced it before it
Yeah,
even happened.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is
Okay,
quite
so-
unbelievable.
So then the police chief or whoever's in charge does order police dispersal at the time, and this police chief or whoever is doing this was working for opposition. Am I misunderstanding something?
No, I think this official narrative or official like investigation claims that this was ordered by Yanukovych himself and his Minister of Internal Affairs, and also Sivkovich, who was working in the National Security and Defense Council, basically, and Mayor of Kyiv, who was representing Yanukovych. But actually, the evidence which was cited in my book and mentioned by Maidan governments themselves, by Kolomoisky and other people, that this was actually order issued not by Yanukovych. There is no such evidence at all, just besides such claims which are not supported by any evidence. But this order was issued kind of by head of presidential administration of Yanukovych, who was owner of this television channel, along with another oligarch, and they tacitly supported. They were basically kind of formally they were working for Yanukovych and supporting Yanukovych, but de facto they were doing opposite. Because of business disputes and because political orientation, so they decided to support Maidan opposition and pro-Western countries and pro-Western and Western countries, and that's why they use this kind of. There was incentive basically for them to stage this violence by the police and then televise this and broadcast this on their own most popular television channel in Ukraine, which was broadcast by all the media. So this is kind of was staged violence with involvement of elements who were sympathetic to Maidan opposition, but also Maidan opposition themselves, leaders who later became part of the government of Ukraine, and also with involvement of far right, including neo-Nazis and far right radical nationalists from right sector, which was also present during Maidan and was just provoking violence with the police, violent clashes with the police during this dispersal.
Okay, so then the next day, because of the violence shown on TV, that energizes more and more people to
Yes.
show up. Okay, so then what happens?
And then there was attempt to storm presidential administration, also with involvement of far-right organizations. Far-right, they took control of the city administration of Kyiv, and they opened a Maidan camp, basically a protest camp with tents were erected on Maidan Square for permanent protest. And this was kind of, so this means this was the name of Maidan movement because of it was located on Maidan Square, which is Independence Square, which is name of which is in Ukrainian means just square, Maidan, from Turkish or Persian term for such a square. And this is protest was taking place on Maidan. It was mostly people were peaceful. Again, they were not violent, but there was very violent elements as well, specifically from far right sector and Svoboda, and they were clashing with police during this protest, which was going on for a long time until violence took place at the end of January 2014, and then this culminated in the massacre on Maidan on February 18 and February 20th, when also was televised and was shown kind of as violence by the police, as mass murder committed by the police and government snipers. But actually, all the evidence showed that this massacre was committed by Maidan opposition, specifically snipers who were located in buildings which were controlled by Maidan opposition.
Let's just take a second and kind of set the stage for an explanation of the controversy that surrounds one of the big themes and topics of your book and other articles that you've published, which is probably the most controversial. That's about the Maidan massacre. What was the kind of media narrative, the main narratives that were out there, what your research found about this Maidan massacre, and then if you could address the Georgia element?
So the media narrative, which was kind of promoted by the Western media and also Ukrainian media, is that this massacre was a mass murder of peaceful Maidan activists, peaceful Maidan protesters who supported European integration of Ukraine. And this massacre was committed by government forces. They blame government snipers from Alpha unit, they blame Berkut unit of special anti-riot police. And this was what was mentioned like by the media immediately, and this narrative was used to overthrow Yanukovych. He was basically blamed by the Western media, by Western governments, by Maidan opposition for ordering this massacre of Maidan activists, specifically to end this Maidan protest against him. And this became dominant narrative promoted by all this media. Again, you have New York Times, BBC, all this Guardian, especially all this kind of media, Western media, presenting this as a fact and denying that there were any kind of involvement of any snipers. They claim this is conspiracy theory, that there were any snipers from Maidan opposition, that any Georgian snipers, they said there were no, this is like conspiracy theory, there was no such evidence, and so on. And I was watching this massacre taking place live, because I was watching all the violence, all Maidan violence live, even so there was a time difference. There were like live streams online, which I was watching each day, and especially when violence started on February 18th. And this violence started with so-called peaceful march on Parliament of Ukraine, which led to kind of violent clashes, specifically which were initiated by Maidan opposition, including in particular far-right sector, which was alliance of radical nationalist and neo-Nazi organizations, some of which became later what is now known as Azov movement, Azov neo-Nazi movement. So they clashed with police, and there were first people were killed on February 18th, and Maidan activists were killed, but also police forces members were killed. And then this violence, there was an agreement then afterwards between Yanukovych and Maidan opposition with support of European countries to have a truce on February 19th, because there was supposed to be agreement signed on February 20th between the Maidan opposition and Yanukovych, with the presence of foreign ministers of Poland, France, and Germany, to have a peaceful resolution of this conflict on Maidan, with agreement to hold early presidential elections, to investigate Maidan massacre, to investigate violence, to withdraw forces from Maidan, and so on. But then, before this agreement was signed in the morning, which was due to be signed, such agreement to end this peacefully, and Yanukovych basically agreed to concessions. In this case, there was a mass murder committed and mass killing of 49 Maidan activists were killed on February 20th. And this was presented by all the media, basically, with very few exceptions, as a massacre committed by government forces. They claim they were government snipers. They claim that they were like police forces just killing Maidan activists for no reason taking place. And I was watching this live. For me, this was just immediately clear that something was not kind of. There was a problem with this narrative because I did not see any evidence that police were shooting at Maidan protesters. You have a lot of videos which police were shooting, but I knew the area very well. I live in Kiev. This is like downtown area. I was there like thousands of times. So I stayed in Hotel Ukraina, all these buildings. I knew the area very well. So for me, this was very surprising to watch all this violence taking place since the end of November, and then suddenly, for no reason, especially before just signing such agreement with opposition and offering such concessions, Yanukovych would order such kind of mass murder taking place in front of all these thousands of television cameras, which were again immediately shown by all the media, and he was blamed for this, and government forces were blamed for this, and I saw no such evidence. So that's why I started to research this massacre immediately, looking in all evidence, not on narratives, but looking into all the evidence. And this evidence now became I published this in my book, open access book, which is called Maidan Massacre, Mass Murder which changed the world. I also discussed this massacre in a book chapter in my book, open access book, The Russia-Ukraine War and its Origins, from the Maidan to the Ukraine War. And I also published 4 peer-reviewed journal articles about this massacre, and also a book chapter in academic monograph about this massacre as well. So this is kind of a very crucial event, because evidence, actually, overwhelming evidence, which I presented in my studies, shows that this massacre was committed not by government forces, but by elements of Maidan opposition, including far-right elements and oligarchic elements of Maidan opposition, by snipers who were located in buildings which were controlled by Maidan opposition, specifically Hotel Ukraina, Music Conservatory, and other buildings which were under control of Maidan opposition. And this evidence includes testimonies at the Maidan massacre trial and investigation by the absolute majority of wounded Maidan activists, forensic examinations by Ukrainian government experts for this investigation. They determined that police bullets do not match, police bullets do not match bullets from bodies of Maidan activists until, again, initial investigations, initial forensic examinations, they determined this. They also determined that Maidan activists were shot from very steep direction, which means they were shot shot in the back or from left or right side, from buildings which were matching locations of Maidan, control locations like Hotel Ukraina, and were not matching location of the Berkut police on the ground level, on the same ground level. So this is like forensic examination, and there were even ballistic examinations conducted by government ballistic experts in a dozen of cases or so, which also determined this, that Maidan activists were shot from these locations. In addition to this, there were testimonies of several hundred witnesses who testified about this, that they saw snipers in Hotel Ukraina, that Maidan activists were shot from these locations. Even so, official investigation denies this and never conducted any investigation of such snipers in these locations, because they say this never happened. So there were also videos of such snipers shooting from Hotel Ukraina. You have like BBC video, Ukrainian ICTV video. I published video. I compiled all the video appendixes of this massacre, all the evidence, video of evidence, which contain like more than a dozen videos of snipers in Hotel Ukraina and other Maidan control locations. Even so, this is denied. But you have videos of them shooting from Hotel Ukraina. You have like Ukrainian television video. You have BBC video. You have like many other videos on social media by Maidan activists who show, again, snipers in Hotel Ukraina, live streams, which I found as well, recording of live streams. So all this evidence is very clear that this is consistent with snipers located in Hotel Ukraina shooting at Maidan activists. and there were also admissions by 14 people who said that they were Maidan activists, and specifically that they received orders to shoot both Maidan they admitted shooting either police, because there were also 4 police members killed and about more than 60 wounded during this Maidan massacre, also by snipers located in Maidan control buildings. So this admissions by 14 members, including by 7 Georgian 7 Georgians who publicly stated that they shot, or they witnessed shooting at the police, and some of them stated, specifically Georgians stated that they received order from Maidan opposition leaders and from former leaders of Georgian government under Mikhail Saakashvili to shoot also not only police but also Maidan activists, and they said they witnessed this, and so on. And they said there were also Maidan snipers from far-right link company, which was led by Parasyuk, who became a member of Ukrainian parliament, and this group included far-right members, and it was based in Music Conservatory and later in Hotel Ukraina. They said that they also witnessed snipers from Poland and from not from Poland, from Lithuania and other Baltic states on the Maidan. So this is like testimonies which were given by Georgians in the media by members of this Parasyuk company, from far-right wing company of snipers, who gave interviews to BBC, to Ukrainian media, and they admitted shooting into police. They admitted also shooting, again, some of them admitted shooting also into Maidan activists, not by them. They did not say that they did this themselves, like Georgians said. So you have admission by members of far-right link company of Maidan snipers that they shot police. They admitted this publicly. There was no, they never were charged, basically never prosecuted for this. Even so, admitted this publicly on television. They killed and shot police. But there were also admissions by Georgians, kind of in the media, in interviews which they gave to Italian television. They also give interview to Macedonian television, to Israeli television documentary, to Russian media. They also provided such testimonies, written testimonies, and they wanted to testify for Maidan massacre trial in Ukraine, in which they repeated these testimonies, and the testimony of one of them was broadcast at the Maidan massacre trial. So this, basically, their testimonies by Georgians were denied, basically by Ukrainian media. They claim that this is actors, basically, like hired by Russian intelligence. Basically, they play actors because they were never on Maidan. They said this is like fake identities. They were just making up all the stories, basically, to kind of to blemish and promote this conspiracy theory that this was violence by Maidan opposition. But actually, this Georgians, again, I could not look into. I'm not able as a researcher to verify identities of people. I don't investigate people, so I involvement specific individuals. So I am, because I just rely on publicly available evidence. But evidence that they provided actually is consistent, perfectly consistent with evidence which I revealed in my Maidan massacre studies, and which evidence which was not yet publicly revealed even. For instance, they said that there was sniper shooting from Hotel Ukraina when the massacre started, in addition to sniper shooting from Music Conservatory. And this was later supported by videos which I found afterwards, that they were shooting from Hotel Ukraina by snipers at the same time when they were shooting from a Music Conservatory controlled by Maidan opposition, specifically by this group. So this evidence, what they said from Hotel Ukraina snipers, is consistent by videos, by other testimonies, and again, but this was never investigated by Ukrainian governments, because they said that, again, that they fake, this is like fake people. They never existed. They just actors using fake names and identities. They never been to Kyiv and Ukraine and so on. And this is very important, because Ukrainian government investigation kind of basically admitted that they doing open cover-up, because you have people who admit that they were present during this mass murder. They admit that they actually want to provide evidence about Maidan massacre because they know this firsthand, but investigation says they are not interested in doing this, so they deny, even before conducting any investigation, they deny that there are such cases. So they basically This is consistent with cover-up and misrepresentation of Maidan massacre by government investigation. But evidence which is supported by these Georgians provided their names, and this was confirmed that their names are actually actual names, not just fake names, identities actual, because they were requesting to testify for Ukrainian massacre trial and investigation. So their identity was confirmed by Armenian government, who issued reports that some of them were living in Armenia after the Maidan massacre. This was also confirmed by Belarusian government because they testified for Ukrainian investigation later on the request from Maidan defense lawyers in Belarus, and this was also confirmed that they provided real evidence, and one of them provided evidence, and actually one of them was confirmed to be in Kiev. He traveled in Kiev. This was supported by evidence from Ukrainian border kind of agency, in which bodyguards they said that he actually traveled to Ukraine. There is such border stamp before Maidan massacre, and this is consistent with passports which they show. So all this evidence is consistent that these were not just Georgians were not just actors, that actually they provided their real names and identities, and their evidence is consistent with other evidence. So I think this is very important to understand that this is, I think, would be reason why Ukrainian government investigation and media would deny this, because kind of this is kind of quite important testimonies, because you have de facto admission that this massacre was committed and confirmation that this massacre was committed not by government forces, but was committed by Maidan opposition, which was presented in the West as democratic, pro-Western, and this was presented as peaceful revolution of dignity, and so on. And instead, you have a mass murder committed by the same people who presented in the West as like heroes, as Democrats and Western values, and supporting and fighting against opposition and the pro-Russian government against dictatorship and so on, which is actually would be the opposite, because these same people were implicated in mass murder, kind of specifically to blame falsely government forces and to seize power in Ukraine under such false pretext, and which means they committed crimes, they committed mass murder, or were involved in mass murder. They also kind of were involved in violent overthrow of Ukrainian government, which are very serious crimes, but this was denied by the media, by politicians, by governments and in the West, and this actually specifically to justify such violent overthrow of Ukrainian government, and no real investigation took place. Even so, you have admissions by such members of Maidan sniper groups who admitted shooting police, basically killing police, or also some of them admitted shooting Maidan activists on orders from Maidan opposition leaders, and so on. And I present other evidence in my book, for instance, that even again, just even name of a revolution of dignity, term revolution of dignity was invented by a far-right member of far-right Svoboda, and far-right Svoboda actually took control over Svoboda party, which was originally a neo-Nazi party called Social National Party in Ukraine. So this party took control over Hotel Ukraina a few weeks before the Maidan massacre. They admitted this publicly. You have videos and photos of members of Svoboda taking, again, standing guard in front of entrance to elevators, main entrance to Hotel Ukraina during the Maidan massacre. You have them standing, living in Hotel Ukraina during the Maidan massacre, staying there. There were like a few dozen members of Svoboda, from parliament members of Svoboda, living in Hotel Ukraina, and actually you have even BBC video shows Maidan sniper shooting into BBC television crew and Maidan activists from Hotel Ukraina window on the 11th floor. And this room, according to even admission by Ukrainian investigation, was occupied at the time by one of the leaders of this far-right Svoboda party. So this is like, and there were other snipers located in the same floor during the Maidan massacre, and you have videos of this far-right group snipers, again, present in Hotel Ukraina and other locations controlled by Maidan opposition. So this is quite remarkable. And in addition to this, there was also 2 interviews given by leaders of Svoboda party after Maidan. They gave this interview to a book which was published by pro-Maidan Ukrainian journalists and writers, who said, and in this interview, separate interviews, they said that Maidan opposition leaders, including themselves, they had a meeting with some Western representative. They do not name who was this representative, but it's very likely somebody who had a position to speak on behalf of the West, which means senior government official or representative from the United States. And they said that they discussed, this was at the end of January, after first or beginning of February 2014, and they said that they discussed what it would take for the Western governments to stop recognizing Yanukovych. And they mentioned there were first few activists killed in the end of January. And they said, is it enough? No, they said that Western representatives said this is not enough. They said like five would be enough, 10 enough. No, they said this is not enough. Western representatives, so they said 20 would not be enough. So they said we agree that 100 would be enough. So if there will be 100 victims, activists killed, so this would be sufficient for the Western governments to stop recognizing Yanukovych, basically and his government. And this is exactly what happened. Immediately after Maidan massacre on February 20th, there was Maidan opposition declared that there was heavenly 100 of Maidan activists. So they used name heavenly 100 specifically to kind of fit the name of 100 activists. Even so, actual number of killed Maidan activists was less than 100. So they included, so this Maidan opposition and media included among this 100 specifically to inflate 100. They included people who died from natural causes, like from illnesses, on Maidan, or from even in other areas, some committed suicide. Some they included even members of Berkut police who were killed during Maidan, as Maidan activists killed. They included people who were again with fake identities. Again, so this is specifically was done to kind of create this 100 activists, heavenly 100, and this is what exactly happened, because there was no reason for Yanukovych again and there was no evidence whatsoever to commit such massacre and then stop this 100. But this is, I think, very important. Also evidence that this was first like Maidan massacre. In addition to this, all the evidence which I presented in my studies was supported to a large extent by a verdict which was issued by Ukrainian court and jury, judges and jury, after a very long Maidan massacre trial, which was broadcast live on and recorded on YouTube, which I examined also for my study, which I mentioned testimonies of absolute majority of wounded Maidan activists. They were shot from locations which were controlled by Maidan opposition, like Hotel Ukraine, and or that they saw snipers in these locations. And even official investigation stated that about half of wounded Maidan activists, other Maidan activists, were shot in the same locations in the same time, but they did not charge anybody with their shooting and their wounding, because they said that they determined that they were shot from other locations which are not controlled by government forces. So which means, again, this is even admission by government forces that they were shot from locations which were controlled by Maidan opposition, because there were no other evidence, no other forces, no Russian presence, no other elements who could have committed such massacre. And this was stated by a verdict of Ukrainian court with judges and jury, who were actually appointed. A jury was selected and approved by one of Maidan leaders who became mayor of Kyiv, Volodymyr Klitschko. And even then, they issued this verdict, which stated that many Maidan activists were killed from Hotel Ukraine and wounded from Hotel Ukraine and other locations controlled by Maidan opposition, and which were not controlled. And they stated specifically these locations were controlled by Maidan activists at the time of the massacre, not by government forces. They also stated there was no evidence of Russian agents' involvement in this massacre. They also stated there was no evidence of any order issued by Yanukovych or his ministers or top commanders of Berkut to massacre Maidan activists. And so this is all consistent with studies which I published in academic venues, and which were denied by official investigation, which was denied by media.
So no investigation was done. No one ever was held accountable.
No, actually, with this verdict, they convicted in absentia like 3 members of Berkut police for murder of 36 out of 49 Maidan activists on February 20th, and wounding of about or slightly more than half of Maidan activists again on that day. But this was done in absentia, so nobody is in prison for this Maidan massacre. no investigation was done about Maidan snipers. Even so, Maidan massacre trial judges and jury issued order to prosecution to investigate, to use ballistic experts to determine if Maidan protesters were shot from Hotel Ukraina and other locations which were controlled by Maidan opposition. So official investigation prosecution did not do this. They Maidan massacre trial lawyers from Berkut, who represented Berkut, stated that when first such experiments were conducted on site of Maidan massacre with presence of forensic experts from this expert determined that Maidan accused were shot from Hotel Ukraina and Music Conservatory, and they said that afterwards this prosecution stopped doing any investigation. They claim they could not do this for 2 years, basically. Even so, court ordered this. So there are no ballistic experts. They could not use any ballistic experts to determine that any Maidan activist was shot from Berkut positions. So this is quite open because this is unbelievable to have no such investigation, but then blame Berkut forces for this Maidan massacre. Even so, this conviction of 3 Berkut officers in absentia was done based on just one evidence, one forensic examination of bullets, which matched bullets from their Kalashnikovs to bullets from bodies of Maidan activists who were killed or wounded. But this forensic ballistic examination was conducted in 2019, 5 years after Maidan massacre, and this forensic examination of bullets overturned or contradicted about 40 other previous examinations of the same bullets by forensic government experts. And specifically, examination of bullets which were conducted using automatic system, computer-based system, which do not match these bullets, the same bullets, to any of Berkut Kalashnikovs. And bullets which were found actually some of the bullets which were found from bodies of Maidan activists did not match even caliber of bullets of Berkut Kalashnikovs. They were from hunting like ammunition from like buckshot or like pellets used in hunting, from bullets which were used like NATO caliber bullets like Springfield and Winchester bullets, which were not at the time type of weapons which were used and type of ammunition which were used by government forces. But again, no investigation, nothing. Even so, bullets, even caliber of bullets, even did not match. So this ballistic examination, again, which was basis for conviction of these Berkut officers for this matter, was contradicted even by videos, by testimonies of Maidan activists. So, for instance, only in one case, the bullet, there was only one match between a bullet, for instance, of which wounded one Maidan activist, and a bullet of and Kalashnikov, which was at the time was a Kalashnikov of one of the Berkut members who was convicted in absentia for this massacre of Maidan activists. But this match, you can see videos, synchronized videos, which I synchronized myself, which are perfectly synchronized based on audio content, and which are also shown as a trial. So you have videos which show that at the time of wounding of this Maidan activist, this Berkut officer was sitting behind barricade, and his Kalashnikovs just standing on the ground. So he was just pointing Kalashnikov to skies. He was not even shooting. At the same time, when police, again there was massacre of Maidan activists taking place, and that this Maidan activist stated to investigation that he was shot by sniper who was at the top of Hotel Ukraina. He said that he was during massacre. He said that he was worried about snipers in Hotel Ukraina, so he tried to protect himself with a chair, and there was a chair which was used, and you have video shown during the trial when forensic government experts show using this chair, just said that this Maidan activist was shot from the top floor of Hotel Ukraina by snipers, not from Berkut positions in on the ground. And you have videos which are published. At the same time, you have videos which Maidan activists show that there were snipers shooting from top floor of Hotel Ukraina at the same time when this activist was wounded. And even X-ray bullet of his wound, X-ray of his wound, this bullet in his wound shows that again bullet had a very steep location, again, which is consistent with medical examinations.
It's all very interesting, but I wanted to kind of move to a different topic for 1 minute, which was about the massacre that also happened in Odessa, because this is another topic that you've written on quite a bit. And, could you just tell what exactly happened in 2014 when there was this massacre that took place in the trade union building in Odessa?
Yes, I published also peer-reviewed journal article about the Odessa massacre and studied this also extensively, and published also included this research also in a book chapter, which I published in my open access book, The Russian-Ukraine War and Its Origins. So all the evidence showed that this massacre was conducted. This was not massacre, again, official narrative and media narrative that this was tragedy, but just fire which was just killed separatists, and also they said there were Maidan activists killed, specifically during clashes between pro-Russian separatists in Odessa and pro-Ukrainian activists or pro-Maidan activists. But actually, all the evidence showed that this was massacre, not just accidental fire. That this fire was conducted, was initiated or was started by Maidan activists who threw basically Molotov cocktails and burning tires into entrance to main trade union building in Odessa, which was in which pro-Russian separatists took refuge during clashes between Maidan activists and pro-Russian separatists. And so in this case, they were basically, they died in this fire, or they died also trying to flee from this fire, trying to jump from buildings and so on. And they were many of them were beaten by this far-right elements who were involved in this massacre. And specifically, you have admissions by right sector, from Odessa at the time, which was a part of Azov, Patriot of Ukraine, which became now Azov movement, neo-Nazi movement. So they admitted that they basically committed massacre of this Russian separatists publicly. And you have videos which show this. You have also testimony of actually one of the Georgian snipers who also said that he was involved in this massacre. They were brought by Maidan leaders to Odessa. And this is not only his testimony. You have video in which he is seen during this Odessa massacre inside of trade union building along with other Maidan activists. So you have basically clear evidence that this massacre was committed perpetrated by far-right elements from the right sector, and including neo-Nazi elements, which now became Azov movement in Ukraine. But there was, again, no prosecution, no investigation, and nobody is convicted for this mass murder, which took place, again, in Odessa. Even so, all the evidence is clear, even if you have public admissions of such responsibility. But again, no denial, no evidence. And even I gave interviews to Guardian when I was watching this massacre, Guardian journalist, and Guardian never reported my interview, which I mentioned that this was far-right activist. It was even clear from videos on that day. But again, no mentioning this. This was just cover up, and this is very common for issue for Ukraine, because media would never report this, because this is not convenient for them, and now they try to present Azov like as heroes, if you can, glorify them. Even so, you have evidence of involvement of Azov, neo-Nazis from Azov, which is in the Maidan massacre or Odessa massacre. Yes.
Sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, but in reality, the success of Maidan really has to do with the far-right forces being organized, right?
No, I think the two factors which played a role in a successful Maidan movement. One was far right, which were like basically a violent force, and specifically their involvement in Maidan massacre. And another was Western government support, because without Western government support, this could not have happened. There was actually would have been investigation. Western governments would not have recognized this overthrow of Yanukovych, which was used by basically falsely blamed for the massacre. So basically, Western governments de facto supported this violent overthrow with elements of which involved the elements of far right and also oligarchic Maidan opposition. Because this was convenient for them, they wanted to use Ukraine even then to weaken Russia, and this is what led to success of Maidan Maidan movement, because Maidan opposition protests were not able to overthrow Yanukovych government. They were not able to change regime in Ukraine, but Maidan massacre and support from the West were crucial elements which led to this overthrow, and specifically is a moment of far-right elements of Maidan opposition.
So can you explain to me why are Georgians involved? Do you have an understanding? Is it like because I know when Saakashvili's in Ukraine, he sort of gets this new life after Maidan, that he would not have had. It's his sort of reincarnation as a different a new political life, so he definitely had a lot to win by the success of Maidan. But other than that, it's like, why are these Georgian former governments so involved that they're giving orders to these other Georgians to go like shoot people?
Because like Georgia under Saakashvili was basically client state of the United States, so they were also like pro-Western and following U.S. government policies. They were dependent on the West. And after Saakashvili lost his power in Georgia, he just tried to move to Ukraine along with many members of his government, and they were supporting Maidan opposition, openly supporting Maidan opposition. And but actually, and Saakashvili then was in the United States teaching at Tufts University, but he traveled to Ukraine, and members of his government were active in Maidan opposition protests taking place, and after Maidan massacre, after overthrow of Yanukovych, many of them became members of Ukrainian government. So you have, I think, deputy, you have prosecutor office, prosecutor general office, minister of deputy minister of internal affairs. You have a head of Ukrainian police, national police, were Georgians basically. So you have basically foreign citizens from Georgia suddenly became members of Ukrainian government, along with other like from Lithuania and so on, from Estonia. So this is also clear evidence that they have a very important role in overthrow of the government, because this was quite unique kind of. I don't know such precedent when you have foreign government. Foreign citizens become like such top government officials, and this is, I think, also kind of very clear evidence that Saakashvili was involved, and his government was involved in this kind of massacre and overthrow of Yanukovych, and Saakashvili was offered even a higher position of prime minister and so on, and this goes back to his education. He got his studied as a student at the end of 1980s in Kiev and international relations faculty, along with Poroshenko. So Poroshenko was one of the leaders of Maidan, and after Poroshenko came to power, so he also tried to offer Saakashvili various government positions and even prime minister of Ukraine, which Saakashvili refused, and he became, for some reasons, and he became kind of head of Odessa administration, and then there was a kind of fallout between Poroshenko and Saakashvili, so Saakashvili moved back to Georgia and was arrested then.
Why still, it's been, how many years? Do you think if the war hadn't started, if Russia had not invaded Ukraine, do you think there would have been ever investigation, a sort of reckoning with Maidan, anything that you think would have happened? Because as far as I understand it, I thought Zelensky was sort of elected because he seemed less like kind of a Euro fanatic, right, at the time. Do you think there was like a real, what's the word, like desire by the Ukrainian population, at least a big chunk, to want to truly investigate what happened and, bring up all this past that had just occurred? Or do you think this sort of continued on, never really being so scrutinized and under some kind of, cloak of part of indoctrination of the state,
Yes, Ukrainians clearly supported the investigation of Maidan massacre because this was a very important event. And Zelensky was elected as president of Ukraine because he promised to have a peaceful resolution of war in Donbas, or conflict in Donbas, and he also promised to investigate Maidan massacre during his election campaign. But he failed to do all of this. Even so, Ukrainians supported. Actually, there were public opinion polls conducted in Ukraine which showed that about 40% of Ukrainians regarded Maidan as illegal overthrow of government. And this was conducted after Maidan massacre. they call this coup. And also during Maidan, public opinion polls showed that Ukrainians were split about half on half in supporting Maidan or opposing Maidan. So this was not kind of all this Ukrainian kind of views, which is now presented that this Ukrainians united and so on. This was big division, which is goes back to history and in many such divisions. But again, Zelensky failed to deliver his promises, and I think this was not just accidental, because he also specifically he failed to do this because of far right, who threatened to kill him if he would make a peace deal with separatists in Donbas, with Russia, to end war in Donbas. They also, again, and this means you needed to investigate far right, and that's why he also did not do any investigation of Maidan massacre for this reason, and continued to kind of perpetrate this false narrative about government forces responsibility. And the same applies to other Ukrainian politicians and government officials, because Ukraine was still a client state and still remains a client state of the United States, and so for this reason, I think also very important, because if the Western countries wanted to do such investigations, they could have obviously pressed Zelensky and demanded such investigation, but there were no such demands. You have total silence from the West. And Western politicians got to Maidan, site of Maidan massacre, like Boris Johnson, all this Ursula von der Leyen, kind of, so she's kind of, and all other politicians and government officials. Biden went to site of Maidan massacre, and they all this talk about victims, about these heroes of Ukraine who were fighting for Europe, for European values, Western values, and so on, who were massacred by government forces, but actually no investigation is done. And I think this is done deliberately, because they knew actually, I think almost definitely, Western governments knew actually what happened, but for them, it was beneficial actually to use Ukraine for geopolitical reasons. So they supported basically Western governments, politicians, they supported mass murder, and people who committed mass murder, and presented this as freedom fighters, as Democrats, and so on, because for them, Ukraine is just a tool against Russia. This is why they supported such massacre.
Ivan, it's a very interesting point that you bring up about how the West was willing to oversee or allow or even support in some ways the murder of people to get their geopolitical interests met. And, another topic that I think is maybe important for us to address here is after the invasion takes place in 2022, in February 2022, very quickly, the Russians and the Ukrainians start negotiating. And I think a lot of people forget about this now, that there's actually negotiations that start very quickly, and then a peace deal is almost made, and then the West intervenes again and sabotages the peace deal. And there's a lot of evidence now that especially this visit of Boris Johnson was a kind of critical moment in sabotaging this peace deal that almost saved the lives of thousands and thousands of Russians and Ukrainians early on in the conflict.
Yes, exactly. And I have a chapter which discusses this peace talks. I publish this on social media. This is why about reports about Boris Johnson and statements by former Israeli Prime Minister, and statement of by former Chancellor of Germany, by President of Turkey, Foreign Minister of Turkey, by head of Ukrainian delegation at peace talks, Arhamia, also by a member of Ukrainian delegation at peace talks, advisor to Zelensky, by another other officials who were involved in these talks. They all stated that there was a very real prospect of a peace deal to be negotiated and finalized in spring of 2022, just very short time after Russian invasion, which could have ended this war. But most of them stated also that Western governments prevented this or blocked this peace deal because they wanted to continue this war in order to weaken Russia. And this is, I think, very clear now that this is, I think, kind of, for me, this is quite unprecedented to see all this kind of claims that these people, Western politicians, governments, they say they support Ukrainians, they care about Ukrainians, future of Ukraine, and so on. But in fact, their policies are opposite, starting from Maidan, when they de facto supported mass murder and mass murders of Ukrainian, even all their own Ukrainian activists, Maidan activists. Now they supported basically this proxy war in Ukraine to the last Ukrainian, basically by sacrificing Ukrainians for the goal, geopolitical goal to weaken Russia. So that's why they're not interested in Ukrainians. They don't care about lives of Ukrainians. For them, Ukrainians are just tools to weaken Russia, to fight Russia, and to achieve their geopolitical goals. So this is why kind of policies which are actually supported by the West and who claim to be, again, pro-Ukrainian, defending and supporting Ukraine actually is opposite, because this is not supporting Ukraine. This is just opposite, because they use Ukrainians as a tool to and they sacrifice lives of Ukrainians to achieve such goals. This is also kind of quite very important, and I mentioned this in my book because this is based on a lot of evidence, and you have even admissions of Boris Johnson admitted this is like proxy war, that they use Ukrainian forces against Russia. So this is quite important part of my study to show this, is because I also study Western policy and the United States policy towards Ukraine, and this is, I think, very clear that this is not narrative, kind of fairy tale narrative like Hollywood style movie in which you have kind of all this kind of fairyland of Ukraine fighting against Russia and so on. But this is actually much more complex, and actually Western policy and Ukrainian government policy are not as kind of as idealistic as they trying to present this. Actually, they have a lot of opposite taking place, because they support policies which are detrimental to Ukraine, which include basically sacrificing life of Ukrainians just to fight Russia or to weaken Russia.
And so moving towards sort of the end, what are ways that they sort of have come after you? In what ways have you been marginalized? They try to cancel you, because you've had this completely, anti their interest research. They've vilified you, or have they, maybe question more, what are the things that you have faced just by presenting this research?
Yes, this started when I started first mentioning this in 2014. My house and my land and all property in Western Ukraine were taken away from me by court decisions which were falsified. Basically, there was a phone call to the judge, basically to the judges to issue such decisions. So they disregarded all the evidence. They took away all my property, all my so I lost all my property, all house in which I live again, my mother lived and so on. So this is quite unbelievable, because you have open kind of evidence that this is done illegally, and there was a moment of people who were connected to Maidan massacre and these decisions. So also they put me on Peacemaker, or this meritorious website, for slandering, basically for slandering good name of neo-Nazis from Azov and from right sector. Basically, this is so this is just quite unbelievable. They also put me on this meritorious for committing a crime of exposing a member of Nazi SS Galicia division who was given standing ovation in the Canadian Parliament, and which led to a kind of apology from Speaker of Canadian Parliament, from Prime Minister of Canada, and the resignation of Canadian Speaker of the Parliament. So this is regarded as a crime. So I committed this crime. Specifically, they mentioned my studies of Maidan massacre, which are presented in academic conferences in San Francisco and published now as peer review studies. They said this I committed crime for this reason, because I kind of they cite my studies as evidence of such crime. So this is done openly, because this website is connected to Ukrainian government, to security forces and police. So this is just open, kind of also trying to kind of go against me for doing this research, because they cannot challenge my studies. They cannot challenge facts, so they try to do this. In addition to this, there are also attempts by some people in academia try to go against me and trying to blame me, kind of claim that this is like conspiracy theory, that there were no snipers in Hotel Ukraina, there was no control of Hotel Ukraina snipers. This is like all the conspiracy theory. Even you have all this evidence now supporting, even verdict supporting this openly stating, this is what I found in my studies, actually is supported by such evidence. Even so, again, this is not reported by the media. You have also claims trying to present me as some kind of linking me to Russia, saying this is like, I repeat, like Russian narrative was again about Maidan and so on, about war. Even so, I use all the evidence. I have no links to Russia whatsoever. I've been in Russia only once, just for 1 or 2 days in 1992 when I traveled to a conference in Estonia. So I have to go via St. Petersburg to travel to a conference because you have no kind of, at the time you do not have, again, kind of, you cannot get visa in Kiev, so I had to go to travel via kind of St. Petersburg to go to Estonia. So this is one time I was in Russia. I have no ties with, again, no contacts with Russia whatsoever, like government and so on. I condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine again. So again, but they try to link me to Russia, kind of. So they use all this kind of false claims, like all this. They were like Russian-born journalist. Katie Young published all this on neoconservative Bulwark website. She published all this claims saying that this is conspiracy theory, that I'm also kind of I am a favorite expert of Russian Russian propaganda or Kremlin propaganda. So even so, I do not give media interviews to Russia, to Russian official media. I do not give again. They try to falsely claim that this is like I'm some kind of pro-Russian or that I am linked to Russia and so on. Quite unbelievable because kind of because they even cite because I'm cited sometimes. Russian media sometimes mention my studies, specifically about Maidan massacre. So they say this is like evidence that I'm linked to Russia. So even so, my comments, my studies, my interviews appeared in more than 4,000 media reports in more than 85 countries, including like 700 reports in Canada, major television networks, and so on, in all major Western media like Washington Post, Guardian, CTV News, Reuters, Associated Press, and so on. So again, but they claim this is like they try to falsely link to Russia. This is, and you have even some academics who are supposed to be again, or some researchers who are supposed to be again relying on evidence. They try to again to make such claims, false claims, trying to cancel me. They to limit my access to. Again, to guns, to kind of try to denounce me again, as all this using false claims. Even so, all the evidence is to the contrary. You have like people like Kuzio, or this who is actually is openly supporting far right elements. Kind of, so he denounces also my massacre study as again as a conspiracy theory and so on. Even so, all the evidence is clear. Again, now is supported by this. And so you have also like people who try to write a collective letter kind of denouncing me for my latest book, for Russia-Ukraine war and its origins, because they said this is again kind of this is kind of I mentioned that Russian imperialism has a secondary role in this war, but that you have this war is escalation of conflicts going back to Maidan massacre. So they try to again to say that you have that this war was like people like Umland and so on. This was later initiated by Umland. And Shekhovtsov, who was actually head of Russian far-right Dugin movement, youth movement in Crimea. And now they present themselves as kind of as holders of the truth. So they try to cancel me and claim that, for instance, you only can talk about war in Ukraine as similar to World War II, like genocide. That there is a genocide of Ukrainians. They basically repeat all these false claims, all the narrative about by the Ukrainian government, by Western governments, that you need to basically to follow this. And they do not publish themselves. They could not publish books, but they claim that they know all these facts because they follow the media. They read the newspapers and so on, and they try to impose this on other people, on researchers. Even so, I am Ukrainian, and I'm also Canadian scholar who researched these conflicts for a very long time, and you have other people who do not do this, so they now become overnight experts. They claim to know everything because just following all these media narratives, which I mentioned again, not reliable and very biased, but they also even to go to against me, trying to counsel again to go even my university position and so on. Even so, I did a study which is now published as a book chapter in academic collection called "Political Economy of Dissent," in which I study all PhD recipients from post-Soviet states, including who received their PhDs in the West, in the United States, Canada, and the US, and United Kingdom, and what happened in terms of their academic positions. So I found that actually there were just few Ukrainian male scholars, political scientists in the West, in the Western academia, in permanent positions or quasi-permanent positions, and only like a couple of them study Ukraine, specialists in Ukraine, and basically all some of them are no longer in such positions. So basically, you have and to get such positions by male recipients from Ukraine and other countries like Russia and Belarus, they on average had about 3 or 2 times less chance of getting such positions compared to their female counterparts and compared to both male and female recipients of PhDs from countries like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, and other countries. So this means you have a clear case of discrimination and a clear case when actually politics dominates meritocracy, because I took into account all controlled publications like tier of university, tier of program in which they graduated. I also took into control the advisor, citations, and so on. But still, you have a very clear kind of there are basically no other or almost nobody else even. Again, male Ukrainian scholars in the Western academia who study this conflicts, again, but they still try to go against me, and even so, they claim publicly that they are supporting Ukraine and Ukrainians. So this is actually very anti-Ukrainian, because I'm Ukrainian, so I regard this as extremely anti-Ukrainian position, and because this is just they support people, they support this war, which now conducted by forced mobilization of Ukrainian males, and they support this openly. Like they now support openly all these neo-Nazis, and they claim that this is basically now again fighters for Ukraine and so on, and they go against Ukrainians who just because they try to rely on evidence and because they cannot challenge based on facts, so they resort to such tactics, which is quite unbelievable that this can be done openly. But for me, this is I understand this is like for me kind of this is just part of the job, because I regard study of Ukraine and Ukrainian politics as kind of as my I always wanted to do this, and so this is for me just a professional responsibility to say what is based on evidence and not just getting all this kind of just narratives, following any government narratives. Is this narrative from Western governments or from media or from the Ukrainian government or from Russian government? I always rely on evidence, and I regard this as professional responsibility of scholar, especially a Ukrainian scholar, to say this publicly and based on evidence, and publish this in academic venues, and also report this on social media, because I report on social media based on my research, academic research, and not kind of which I specialize in researching these issues. So I think this is kind of very despicable attempts by people who kind of became again activists and became info warriors, and they abandon any kind of pretense of academic research objectivity and so on. They openly say you need to be partisan and so on, which is I regard this as completely unacceptable, and regard scholars need to rely on evidence and not on any narrative, and promote any kind of government or any other kind of narratives. But I think this is now very difficult to do, but I think eventually it would become clear that that actually these people who promoted such narratives would be they would be disproved by evidence, which is now already clear with case of Maidan massacre. So, so instead of recognizing their kind of that they were made false claims, they now totally forget about this. They ignore all this new evidence and they pretend this has never happened. So they, the same people who denied Maidan massacre, kind of by far-right snipers from Hotel Ukraine and other locations, they now claim they now silent about these revelations from Ukrainian trial verdict about my books and so on, because they cannot challenge this, but instead they become silent and now move to other claims. Again, this is very kind of unprofessional. This is very kind of, I regard this as similar to what happened in during Stalin kind of era, when people were denounced basically because again, for reasons they just for crimes which they never committed. So this is like quite unbelievable.
La la la, la la la.